To begin, thank you all for being here.
Yes.
um, but so this will be his final seminar, and then we'll do the Q&A, and I'll do similar to like I did last night. When we do the Q&A, I'll come around with the microphone, and if you could please ask your question into the microphone, just so he'll be able to hear better. But the biggest thing is we are going to record this and have it on our YouTube so that people that are out of town, or if you really like it and want to share it with friends, it'll be on there. And it makes it easier if you can hear people's questions and not just his responses. So I'll go around with the microphone, and we'll do that after this seminar. And so let's pray,
Sounds good.
and then I'll hand the time over to you.
Sure.
So I'll let Calvin and Jean get in here. All right, let's pray. Our loving, gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the time that we've already spent together and with you. And now as we continue talking about intergenerational discipleship, we just ask that you would speak to our hearts and our minds, and that we would not only learn new information, but be able to apply it to our lives. And we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, this seminar is called Can't We All Just Get Along? And we sort of mentioned it a couple of times that often a lot of the things that there's conflicts over in church, it's often generational issues. And basically, the first thing is intergenerational conflicts is going to happen because humans are present. Okay, we fight even if they're all the same generation, but people are there, so there's going to be conflicts that are going to take place. The biggest likely conflicts that you're going to get: worship style. Worship style is, people have been bickering about worship style at least for the last 500 years. Sometimes people say, "Oh no, this is the right way to do it." People have been saying that for like there's records going back 500 years of people saying that same thing. So worship style is a big area for having conflict, because we need to keep in mind that generations are subcultures, and so we may not see eye to eye when it comes to things like music, because music often is something that we become a part of, and it becomes part of our culture. So worship style is a likely conflict between different generations. Leadership is another likely conflict, because different generations have different expectations of how you should lead. The older generations tends to be more of a top-down approach, whereas the younger the generations are, the more fluid it becomes, and the more everyone has a say. And so that's another point of conflict when it comes to different generations. And of course, there's ministry direction. um, and we're gonna look at specifically what the different generations typically like to do when it comes to ministry, and also when it comes to money. A lot of fights happen between different generations in church because one generation thinks that we should use the money for Christ in this way, and another generation thinks we should use the money for Christ in that way. And the reality is, well, you're using money for Jesus, so it's all really good stuff. But we tend to fight about how are we going to be the hands and feet of Jesus, and we fight about. It's really silly. Should we be the hands or should we be the feet? And these are some of the issues that take place, and it has to do. Sometimes it has to do with the different generational stance people have. And this is why yesterday I mentioned it's not wrong perspectives, it's different perspectives. Who you're doing mission to, I don't think there's really a wrong answer to that. Who are you being Christ to? We should be being Christ to lots of different kinds of people, and sometimes we get riled up because we think it should be a certain way. This is just to give you a flashback to yesterday to see where everyone is. It is also important to keep in mind that it's not just our generation that informs us and that forms us, but it's also our life phase. Um, so the things that I mentioned with yesterday when it came to, for example, the silent generation, the baby boomers, Generation X, some of those viewpoints and some of those characteristics have changed as they have gotten older because life teaches them different things. There are a lot of things that they have retained, but there is perspectives that are different, and it has to do with how they go about things. And when you have kids, that changes things quite a bit. When you get into the workforce, that changes things. When you retire, that changes your outlook on things. I'm going to be showing you 4 tables that have to do with values. And we're going to be looking at different topics and how the different generations tend to see values. So, starting off with work. Traditionalists, they like to work in a team atmosphere. That's how they won the wars. They won the wars in teams. They like to take things on as a team. Baby boomers and Gen Xers like to work independently. The baby boomers like to work independently because it was the whole individualism thing. Gen Xers like to work independently because they grew up where they were by themselves, and so they got used to that, working things themselves. The millennials, however, they like to work as a team. And you can really see this when you look at the media. You think of the movies that have come up over the years. When I was growing up, in the movie theaters, it would be movies where one cop takes on the entire city, very independent. Today you have the Avengers. It's a team of heroes. You have the Justice League, a team of heroes. You have all these. You have movies. You have movies of the military doing thing, and the movie is covering not one person; it's covering a whole team of people. And so you'll see this aspect even in the media, and they tend to really latch on, well, what does the younger generations who have money, what do they like? And they tend to make movies according to that. When it comes to how to take challenges on, traditionalists take on challenges by the book. No, this is how we do this. We've always done this way. This is the way the rules are. We need to follow the church manual. The church manual says this, and so this is how we have to do it. Baby boomers, they take on challenges assertively. They will want to get the job done. We'll try to do whatever it takes just to get it done. Be assertive, just attack it. Gen Xers are very pragmatic. We tend to take on things with a very realistic view. We will weigh up the pros and cons, and we will try to do things in a way where it works. Whereas millennials, they take on challenges with sophistication. They will find out the best way with the newest research, and then they will add some apps onto that thing as well, and they'll do it so it's not just done, but it's done with sophistication. We're going to do it the best possible way, and that's how we're going to do it. Treatment of alternative views. Traditionalists tend to be intolerant towards alternative views. Not so, as they've gotten older, they have gotten a lot better at this. And again, it has to do with the world that they grew up in. Baby boomers, when it comes to treatment of alternative views, or you could even just say differences on perspectives, baby boomers are tolerant from a distance. And so they'll be like, yeah, that's good. You should do that. I'm just going to be over here. You go. I'm supporting you. You do that, and you have my full support. But you do that. Gen Xers, we work beside often, and so Gen Xers would be like, okay. Well, here's the challenge. You want to do that? Like, oh, you do that. I'm going to do it. Let's both work on it and just see what we can do together. But we're working beside each other, but not necessarily. And at the end, you sort of see, does it come together or not? Millennials, they work with. Millennials will want to work with. They will say, all right, well, you see it that way, I see it this. Well, what can we do so that we're doing both things together? Let's just work together on it and blend everything together so we have something new. And that's how the different And again, this is generalizing. So it's not to say that everyone everyone does it exactly like this according to the generation, but this is in general, this is what tends to happen. This is a fun one. Authority is to be respected if you're a traditionalist. Um, it's not to say over the years they haven't learned that authority can be corrupted. They definitely have. But usually, authority is to be respected. That person is in charge. That person has that rank. That person is this high up in the hierarchy. That person has been here way longer than us. You respect what they say. And that's it. For baby boomers, authority is to be questioned. You need to question things. You need to make sure things are going the right direction. So you question to prevent bad things from happening. You need to keep those in charge on their toes and ask them questions so they just don't do things without thinking about it. Gen Xers, authority is untrustworthy. Generation X often do not trust politicians at all. They often don't trust executives or sometimes even in the church, they don't trust. And again, it goes back to the society that we grew up in, where there was a lot of corruption. We saw people who were in charge, and not only were they not wanting to be questioned, but they were doing things in a way that was causing harm. And so, unfortunately, that's left a bad taste in the mouth of a lot of Generation Xers. I think we're probably more trustworthy of people than we used to be. Maturity sort of does that, especially now that Generation X is now moving into leadership positions. Because it's always easier to say things about leadership when you're not in leadership. But this tends to be where, for a lot of the time, you need to gain the trust of Generation X. For millennials, authority is earned. Generation X, they're actually quite similar to, millennials are very similar to Generation X. They don't necessarily see people as untrustworthy, but they see authority as something that you need to earn my respect. It doesn't matter to me that you're really that you have a lot of money or you've been here for 30 years or you're in charge. I will respect you if you respect me. If you treat me well, I will have a lot of respect for you. But if you don't treat me well, I will not respect you. That's pretty much how millennials run things. Yeah. When it comes to perspective on life, traditionalists, although sometimes they come across as being negative, they actually usually are optimists. They usually think that everything's going to work out. Baby boomers are idealists. Baby boomers have always been very conceptual. They've sort of thought, yeah, we're going to do this, and it's going to end up being the best possible thing ever. Generation X are realists, where we'll go, yeah, I'm not really sure of that. It's not all bad. It's not all good. Very much realistic. Sometimes it comes across as pessimistic, but it's more realistic than anything. And millennials tend to be optimistic. Millennials tend to think they're, and you may notice as we look at these different perspectives that there's actually a lot of common traits between the traditionalists and the millennials. And often and it's interesting. There is a theory that says every 4 generations, the characteristics repeat and the perspectives repeat. And the millennials they are 4 generations away from the GIs who are dying. And they share a lot of the same characteristics as the GIs. And the digitals share a lot. Some of the characteristics that are coming out are similar to the silent generation. It's interesting stuff. Pardon? Well, they're not up there yet because they're not quite in the workforce yet. So yeah. So we don't until a fair few of them are into the workforce. It's hard for us to really know because when they're in school, they really have to go by the rules and that sort of thing. But once they actually step out into adulthood, then we get to see more of what they're like. So probably in another couple years, I'll have to add the digitals on here, and that'll be interesting. Yeah. Use of resources. Traditionalists tend to be frugal. I remember when I was working at my first school in Canada in the middle of nowhere, there were these science textbooks that were about 30 years old. And if you know anything about teaching science, you need to get new textbooks every 5 years because science changes that quick. And I was throwing them out, and I got blasted by a traditionalist. They're like, "Oh, you can't throw them out. They're still really good." And I'm like, "They're 30 years old." And like, "That's still fine." And I was a trained science teacher, and in the end I was like, "Oh, okay." And I thought I'll get rid of them later. um, Traditionalists like to hold on to things, and a lot of that comes from going through the depression, or maybe they didn't go through the depression, but they were a few years off of that, and so they really hold on to things. A lot of the people, a lot of hoarders come from the traditionalist generation, and it's just because of just in case, let's hold on to it. It might be useful, and this is true in church as well. Very frugal. Sometimes I pastored in some churches where there was mostly elderly people, and their savings account, even though it was a small church, was huge because they never spent any money on anything. Um, Baby boomers are consumers. We've got the money, let's just spend it. We can't take it with us, so let's just spend the money. Let's just get what we need, and we'll do it. That's very much a baby boomer thing. Gen Xers tend to be inventive. So Gen Xers will find a way to get what they want without spending a whole lot of money. And so they might modify some things that they already have in an attempt to use the money for other things. A lot of Generation X and millennials actually they don't necessarily like having church buildings because it ties up a lot of money that could be used for serving the community. Yeah, millennials are very entrepreneurial. Millennials will forget being frugal. Millennials will find a way to make the money make more money. So millennials are very entrepreneurial. They will create something that is bringing in an income. I can give you an example of a church. A friend of mine, he's actually American in Australia. Their church plant has just become a church, just in a matter of 3 years. It's grown that quick since it was planted. And he's a millennial. He also is an entrepreneur. A lot of church planters are, and they bought a um, they bought a business space on the main street of this town that they live in. And so there's all this shopping and everything right next to it, and they bought it right there. They've converted the back end of it as a church, and as you walk in, on one side of the church, the space that they have, they are turning it into a juice bar. And on the other side, they have it as a secondhand shop. And so they've created something where they are giving to the community. They're going to be able to have Bible workers working in the juice shop. The juice shop will be making money for the church, so they don't have to be dependent on tithes all the time because it's a lower socioeconomic area. The op shop is giving back to the community, and the church, once it's all settled, it's basically going to be set. It's just going to be making money. That's a very millennial idea. When it comes to resources, they've found a way to basically turn their church so that it's actually giving to the community, and the community is literally giving to them. For traditionalists, rules are based on morals. For baby boomers and Gen Xers, rules are based on freedom. It is a little bit different, but they're both based on freedom. For millennials, it's based on morals. For traditionalists and millennials, very much into is it right or wrong. For Gen Xers and baby boomers, The rules are based on, well, we are freer if we have these. And it's a different way of looking at things. These next two cause a lot of arguments in the church. When it comes to valuing objects, traditionalists value based on craftsmanship. If you're in a church with a lot of traditionalists, try changing the pews. The traditionalists will say, do you have any idea how long it would have taken someone to carve these wooden pews out, and all the blood and sweat it would have taken? It would have taken them hours. It would have spent all this time, and we used money for it, and look how beautiful they are. We don't want to get rid of the pews. They're part of our history, and it's the craftsmanship. Baby boomers are into functionality. So the baby boomers will say, yeah, but it's hurting my back. Okay, these pews are hurting my back. They are uncomfortable. We need to get rid of them. They are not functional. Yeah, exactly. Well, the Gen Xers are into innovation. And so Gen Xers will say, well, why don't you just take the pews and put cushions on the back of them? That way you can keep your pews and you can make them more comfortable. And then the millennials are into versatility, and so they'll be like, well, why don't we just get beanbags? Or let's find a way to get pews that the pews get packed up, so you can turn the place into in a recreational thing, or we'll get beanbags because you could just be in whatever position you want. And if you think about it, these come into play when it comes to things that the church owns. These are, let me ask, before I ask this next one, let's look at the next one, performance. For traditionalists, value when it comes to performance is based on effort. You can have someone that is singing and they sound like a cat, and they'll be like, oh, they've tried so hard, it's so great, they've put so much effort into it, it's just wonderful. The baby boomer, their value is based on quality, and so they'll be like, but they sound awful. Like we need to give our best to God. We need to get people up here who really know how to sing and play instruments, and especially if churches are live streaming, they're like, we can't have anyone up here unless they're really, really good, because what message are we sending out? Well, Gen Xers, performance is valued based on intentionality. For a Generation X, they'll be like, but what were they really trying to, what was the intention behind what they were doing? Like, what was the intention of the song, just trying to really help us to get to a certain spot? Where were they going with it? Was there any point to the song at all? Or the sermon, did the sermon accurate? Was it just words? And the millennial, it's authenticity. And so the millennial, the person, maybe they don't sing, maybe they do. For the millennial, it's basically, it's a fake test. So for the millennial, if they can see that the person is singing or playing or preaching and they're being real and they're being authentic in who they are, that is gold. Because to the millennial, it's all about making sure that you are actually being who you are when you're up the front and you're not putting on a mask. Now, let me ask you this. Is effort a good thing? It is. Is quality and excellence a good thing? Is intentionality a good thing? Is authenticity a good thing? We fight about things and they're all good. You want to have all of them in what you're doing at church, at work, when you're playing, in your family. They're all good things. But, this keeps cutting out. Oh, sure. They're all good things. And this is why we are not actually bickering because we have different values. Every generation values effort. Every generation values quality, intentionality, and authenticity. What we often fight about is our priorities of which value is the highest on the list. They're all really good. We're fighting about which godly value is better than another godly value. Well, if they're all godly values, we shouldn't be bickering about them, should we? And when we do things up the front, it's good to keep things in mind. It's a lot harder, but try to find a way that you can merge all these things. Um, it is good for people not only to put effort into things, but to do things well up the front. But at the same time, you don't want to. I've been in churches where, unless you were a professional, you weren't up the front. Well, that cuts out kids. Okay, most kids would not cut it at all. Um, it's things to think about. They're all good things, and it's good to keep this in mind. Same with the valuing objects. Craftsmanship is important. So is functionality. So is innovation. Like, we need to think about these things when we start to argue about things. When it comes to how we come across, traditionalists can come across as unemotional. Baby boomers can come across as passionate and loud sometimes. Gen Xers can come across as jaded. And millennials come across as confident, often overconfident. And again, it goes back to how we were raised and our perspectives on life. Thinking specifically of church and ministry. For traditionalists, faith is private. They don't talk about their faith. Often. There are some who do, but often they wouldn't talk about their faith in the workplace or anything, because a lot of them were taught that there's some things that you don't share with other people unless they ask. So unless someone asks, do you go to church? What church are you going to? You basically don't say very much about that. For baby boomers, faith is experienced. And again, this is generalizing, but sometimes baby boomers come across as everything needing to be about feelings and everything. You need to help people to feel certain things in church. You need to help them to feel loved, and you need to make sure people feel like they're doing what is right. And for baby boomers, faith is often experience. This is something that really gets put forward. For Gen Xers, faith is lived. For a Generation X, they will get frustrated if a pastor is talking about what everyone should be doing, but the pastor's not doing it. Generation X will get really upset about that. Generation X doesn't want the pastor to just talk about conceptual things. They want to actually talk about, well, how do you actually do it? For Generation X, how is most of the questions that they will want to ask. So how do we do this? You're saying lots of great stuff, Pastor, but how do we do it? How do we be a Christian? Everyone knows you're not supposed to do things, but how do you not do things? And for millennials, faith is authentic. It needs to be something that, it goes a bit with what Generation X is sort of saying. It has to do with, are you actually, the things that you're doing, is it coming through that you are actually Christian? That you actually believe these different things. Mission goes to other countries for traditionalists. They grew up where you were always giving to foreign missions. You were helping them, so you would send the people to preach the gospel and to do things for places where people don't have anything, and those places are not here. They are places far away, often in the in Africa, in South America, in Asia. For baby boomers, mission should go to the needy in church. So baby boomers will say, yeah, but we have all these people here in church who are struggling. We should make sure that some money is going to those who are needy in the church. We can't just give everything. We can't ignore our own family members, even though we need to make sure money is going to people here as well. For Generation X, mission should go to the local community. For Generation X is very much a generation who likes to have soup kitchens and secondhand stores and things like that, where they're giving to the community, very much into outreach, not always into global outreach, but definitely into, a thought that is very much a Generation X thought is, if the church were to disappear, would the local community notice? That is very much a generation kind of thinking. And it's something that is important to think about. Millennials, Mission goes to local and global. Everyone should have stuff. It's sort of like Oprah. You get one, and you get one, and you get one. Like it's local and global. Millennials want to give to foreign mission, but they also want to give to the local community, and they want to help those who are in the church. How can we make it so we're giving to everyone? You'll notice one thing with millennials love options. They do not like doing the same thing all the time. They don't. Just you'll notice this come up on a few things that we're talking about. And it's a good thing. We should be giving to everyone who needs it. Serving tendencies. Traditionalists tend to be regimented. So, no, I've always been part of the Dorcas, and I'm just going to keep doing that. And this is how I give, and I always do this, or I always help in the kitchen, and this is what I do. And everyone has a job, and you keep doing that ministry that you're doing forever. Baby boomers. It's all about the plan. For baby boomers that love making plans, love to make elaborate plans. We're going to do all these things. Doesn't matter if the plan doesn't happen, but it may very much a plan where you have all these things marked out and you get everything figured out. And sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. But for baby boomers, that love to put a lot of focus into the planning aspect of ministry. For Generation X, they're very happy to help if their schedule allows. And it's not because they don't want to help, it's because they're busy. A lot of them are parents, but they're also realists. Generation X is realists. So Generation X, they sort of like the plans that the baby boomers like to have, but in another sense, they're like, yeah, but is it going to work? So they tend to go, yeah, I'm happy to serve. I am free on this day, and this day. I can't do any other days, so I'm happy to come in and help the church on these days. Millennials are opportunistic with serving tendencies and with most events. For a millennial, basically, if you have an event on and you invite them to it, you will not know if they're actually going to go to the event until 10 minutes before the event. And the reason why is because the millennials are opportunistic. They will not commit to something unless they have looked at all the options and they have seen, well, which is the best plan that I can do? Should I go to the movies? Should I go out to a meal with these people? I've been given 3 things that I could do Saturday night. What should I do? And it's the same thing with church. Oh, well, that ministry there's a space in there for me to do that, but there's also space. Which one? And you may not find out what they commit to until it's about to start, and then they might show up and say, yeah, okay, I'm going to do this. And they'll be there for a few months, and then they might go and, oh, that sounds really good too. And then they might go and do that other ministry. Church, for traditionalists, is about reverence. Okay? We need to make sure we are showing God that we love him, we revere him. Baby boomers, church is about values. We need to make sure we are teaching people the right values so that they know how to live. Generation X, church is about needs. We need to be making sure that we are fulfilling the needs of the community, that we are being spiritually fed, and that can be a bad thing for Gen Xers too, because church isn't about meeting your needs. It is about worshiping God. Our needs are as a byproduct. Millennials, church is about relevance. When they go to church, they really feel like there should be something that is tied to their life in a real way, or else why go? For when it comes to what you need to focus on, and pastors will, TJ, you may have picked this up. For traditionalists, pastor, it's been 3 weeks since you've talked about Revelation. Why aren't you talking about Revelation more? It's all about doctrine. We need to teach the doctrine. Every sermon should be about doctrine, which is quite a struggle with younger pastors because that's not doctrine. We like to wrap doctrine up in stories and other things. Baby boomers, you're not talking about love enough, or you're not talking about the things people need to be doing enough, and we need to make sure that people are feeling like they need to get up out of their seats and do things. For Generation X, the needs to focus on what is practical. Here comes the how question again. Okay, pastor, but you need to actually talk about How are we going to do this? Well, how do we avoid temptation? How do we follow Jesus? How do we do these things? Give us a list of how so we can actually be Christian instead of telling us to be Christian. Millennials, again, they want it all. Doctrine, feelings, and practice, everything there. They want to have all of it. Millennials want it all. And they want it right now. Yeah. This is the last slide with these. Preferred church size. Traditionalists tend to like small churches. They're quite comfortable in the small country church that has maybe only 20, 30 people, because you know everyone. Baby boomers, bigger is better. The mega churches around, they were started and they continue to happen because of baby boomers. Baby boomers love the bigger the better. Like baby boomers is all about big things, huge. Like make it as big as we can. Let's see if we can fill up this concert hall, this stadium. And so baby boomers, again, this is generalizing, but a lot of baby boomers, the bigger it is, the amount of people that come is a measurement of how good something is at church. Generation X, they like medium size. So this is about the size. The size of this church is just right for Generation X. Millennials, they like house churches. They like small groups. Like they like, if you go to university campuses, sometimes people will make the mistake in thinking that, the young people, the young adults these days, they're not spiritual at all. They're not coming to church. What a lot of people don't know is that, they're not coming to the big church. A lot of them, they had their evening program like this. They had the Vespers that took place. And then after the Vespers, they spent an hour with their friends. And then after that, they spent another 2 hours having Bible studies in their rooms. That's sort of church for them. They like small, and so sometimes they won't come to church, but we can't really say that they didn't have church. They did have it. They just had it at like 11 o'clock at night with 5 or 6 people. And they did sing some songs, and they did read the Bible, and they shared thoughts. They don't tend to like really big, crowded places because it goes on to the next one. You'll see why they prefer an interactive setting for church. They want to actually be part of church. And when it's too big, you can't really be part of church. You end up sitting down and listening. Preferred church program. Traditionalist, formal, structured, regular. Needs to be like a clock. It's, you know exactly when whatever's going to happen. You know when the prayer's going to happen. You know the kind of when the songs are going to be. Everything is structured and regular. And if you try to change anything in the program, it's usually a traditionalist who'll get angry at you and say, "What are you doing? Why are we changing this? Why are we standing now? We're supposed to stand in 10 minutes." Baby boomers, they love high quality, big production. So baby boomers, they love putting on a show. And I'm not saying that to make it sound fake, but they like things high quality. They want to be excellent. They love the live streaming. Millennials and Gen Xers see the live streaming as something that is practical. Baby boomers is something to be proud of. It's like, we're sending it out. We're doing well. It's this big production thing. Gen Xers, they like unstructured and functional. So a Generation X is fine with church being fluid. They're happy to have it so that it's a different style each week. They're happy for the chairs to get moved sometimes. They're happy for 1 week church format's going to be like this, another week church format's going to be like that. Yeah, they're very much in making it so that if someone comes in from the community, they're not going to be threatened by high church. Millennials, I've mentioned this, the reason why they tend to like tiny like house churches is because they really love interaction. they want to have a say in church. They want to be able to share their thought. They don't really want to, if they want to sit and watch something, they'll watch something on their phone, um, where they can pick exactly what they want. And if they go to church, they actually want to be interactive, which is why they often like small groups. Millennials love small groups. Yeah. Music, traditionalists love traditional music. They love hymns. It's what they grew up with. It's something that they've held on to since they were young. They're very comfortable with that. Baby boomers love contemporary. Most of the people are often surprised by this, but a lot of the worship wars that happen in churches, it's not the young people, it's the baby boomers who often start them. Some and sometimes the younger people do, but baby boomers, they usually go one direction or the other. Either whatever's the newest they love. Sometimes they stick with the hymns, but music is something that they very much want to. They want to have whatever is the most contemporary for their style possible. Whatever is really new, they love that. Gen X, blended. We tend to love a mix, so tend to take a hymn and speed it up. Take a contemporary song we listen to the radio that's a Christian worship and slow it down. Make it so that it blends together, which is hard to do. And then there's the millennials. They love everything. They want it all. Just don't have the same thing all the time. It will drive them insane. And even if you have the most contemporary music, they won't like that every week. Think of it this way. When I was growing up, usually we had about maybe 3 or 4 styles of music that we really liked as a Generation X. Baby boomers, usually 1 or 2. Millennials, if you look on their phones, you'll probably find about 30 different genres of music. They will like country, they will like rap, they will like classical, they will they will have they'll have R&B, they'll have subgenres of music. They'll have indie music, which is independent music where it doesn't fit into any kind of genre. Millennials like lots of options. They like to listen to different kinds of things. Millennials are neo-traditional, and they like traditional music with a new twist on it. They like blended like the Gen X. But a millennial would be very happy, usually, if you had a hymn, and a hymn played the old way. If you had a contemporary Christian music song, and if you had something from like the 80s or 90s, they would think that's great, as long as you kept things changing every week. I worked in there was one church that a pastor was struggling a bit. He was aiming for the young adults, the millennials, but he was just playing like contemporary and Hillsong all the time, and they weren't always coming. And that would have worked maybe for Generation X, but for millennials, they actually want a variety. They don't want the same thing all the time, even if they like it. They don't. Yeah. Preferred learning environment. Traditionalist is all about Bible study. It's often the measurement of how good a pastor is. Well, how many Bible studies are you doing, pastor? Bible study, it's just they love Bible study. Baby boomers love to have a program. They love to use programs. Programs are good. There are limitations to programs because they are tools made for specific purposes. Baby boomers love to have a program. Maybe it's a 7-week series that you go through at church or whatever. Generation X loves small groups. We have a tendency as Adventists to think that a small group is a Bible study. It's not. Bible study, they have 2 different purposes, and both purposes are very godly. A Bible study, the purpose is to read the Bible and to understand the Bible. A small group, the purpose is to become a community with God. Okay, so in a small group, you will have a mini Bible study, but in a small group, you will ask everyone, how was your week? Oh, what happened in your week that made it really hard for you? Do an activity to help us to get to know each other more. This is something that we can learn to help us to have a better prayer life. That's what a small group is. And you'll have a little Bible study in there. Millennials, they love mentoring. That's their preferred learning environment, is to actually have a mentor, to get together with one other person who they look to for advice and hang out with them. The millennials crave mentors. Millennials love being with older generations, whether they're 10 years older, 20 years older, 40 years older. They like learning from other people. They want to be friends with their mentor. And a mentor is not someone who just tells them what to do. It's someone who listens to what's happening, and who just gives their opinion because of what their experience was like. Doesn't tell them what to do, but just shares. Oh, well, I found this when this happened to me. Millennials think that is great, and they love that kind of learning. And unfortunately, it's an area that many churches struggle with. There's a lot of churches that I go to where there's not really any mentoring that's taking place. Finally, expectations of church. For a traditionalist, respectful, traditional, and familial. For baby boomers, church needs to be excellent, passionate, and new. Baby boomers love new. If it's the latest thing, baby boomers think it's amazing. It's the latest thing. Even if they don't know how to use the gadget, if they can have the gadget and say it's the latest thing, it's great. That was my father-in-law. Generation X, it needs to be personal, practical, and meaningful. And then finally, millennials, it's the 3 R's: real, relational, and relevant. So what do we do with all this? It's good to keep these things in mind when we're trying to make a church intergenerational, so that's friendly to different generations. It's also good to keep these things in mind. If there's conflicts that are happening in the church, maybe it's just because we have different priorities of values. And it's not that the values are wrong, it's just we have different priorities on them. So last thing. So how do we get along? Do to others as you would have do to them. Sort of a simple thing that Christians often forget when they're actually in the heat of whatever's happening. Understand battles are often over prioritizing one godly value over another godly value. They're both good things. It's often over methodology, not theology. We fight about how to be like Jesus. Sometimes we argue about theology, but most of the time we fight about how to do church. The way we do church today, and this isn't saying that you guys aren't doing church properly, but the way we do church today and the way that any church is doing things today, the apostles would have no idea what you're doing. They'd be like, what are they doing? Why is one person talking all the time? Why are they all sitting down? There's lots of different ways that we can be church. And we need to understand that. And Paul was a Greek to the Greek, a Roman to the Romans, a Jew to the Jew. We need to find ways, we need to realize that how we are Christian isn't that big of an issue. It's more, are we Christian? Are we actually being like Jesus? That's more the question we need to worry about. Misunderstandings and hurt feelings is also another reason. Hurt people hurt people. If we spent more time serving, sharing, and praying together, we would spend less time fighting each other. If we're actually ministering to a common cause, if we're both working in the kitchen together, doing stuff, if we're spending time serving, if we're foot washing each other's feet, we don't agree with each other, try foot washing with someone that you don't agree with. A lot of people don't go to foot washing and say, oh, it's really uncomfortable. That's the point. That's the whole point of foot washing, is that it's uncomfortable. Every generation needs to be involved at every level and every ministry. Try your best to plug every generation into every level of the church, whether it's deacons or elders, ministry leaders. Mentor them into the roles, and try to make it so that every generation is in every kind of ministry you do. if you've never put money into an account, you're going to struggle to take money out. I think I talked about that yesterday, didn't I? Love people, be positive with them. You need to do that before you can say anything to them. You need to build a relationship first. And then finally, if you can't merge two values together, then learn to take turns. We learned that in kindergarten. We struggle as adults with a lot of things we learn in kindergarten. Okay, you can't mix the kinds of worship together, then have 1 week where you do one kind, have another week where you do another kind. Take turns. That's the end of the seminar. Thank you very much for listening. I guess we're going to just go straight into question and hopefully some answers for you. 5. You want to go ahead and you don't have to ask them all in order. Maybe spread them so that just in case. I'll do my best.
One that is just so it's a very close to what we were talking about just a bit ago. Can a person fill all the boxes across the board? We're talking about the traditionalists doing this and the boomers and all these other.
So can we try to hit all of them?
Yeah, can one individual fill all those boxes and have all those different qualities?
It's difficult to. I don't think it's impossible. It probably means that you need to be much more intentional and much more tolerant. But it's a lot harder. It might be easier to do some of them at a time and some of them at another time. But I don't think that we have to be stuck in one box. We can definitely start to think about how can I hit. Like I know with I shared this with one class. A friend of mine is teaching at Avondale. He's teaching pastors, and it was on biblical. I think it was on biblical discipleship or spirituality. And I shared this, and he wants to take these tables and he wants to use them and teach them in hermeneutics, teaching preaching, so that pastors learn that you need to try to meet, not just have the same kind of thing, but you need to try your best to hit more people with it.
Yeah, because I was seeing that on the music aspect. I don't know if you go back up there. Okay, traditional, contemporary, blended.
The blended is a mix of traditional and contemporary.
Yeah.
So I think if you could gently work with the silent generation, the traditionalists, and have blended and neo-traditional, you probably will. If they can see that their music is in there, that's a way to make it easier. But it is a lot harder to do.
What I find is that those that are very traditionalist have a hard time with the contemporary.
They do.
But they're open to the contemporary if the music is known to them.
Right. Yeah.
But if it's all new and every time the contemporary team comes over and does a new song there, you'll see that they stay silent.
You need to teach it to people. You can't have new songs every week, or else it's a show. If it's a new thing every week, no one's ever going to learn it. No one's going to be singing it except for the people at the front.
Yeah.
I find often the traditionalists, they don't mind contemporary if it's slowed down. Mm-hmm. If it's slowed down and they can see what the words are and the words actually are fitting theologically, they're usually all right with it.
Yeah, I think just what you were asking, I think it depends on the boxes, because some of them you can feel all of those at the same time, but then other ones, like, it'd be hard to want a small church, but also the biggest that you can get. And so I think it depends, because, I mean, even for me, some of them I found myself like, I'm kind of all of those things. But then on others, I could pinpoint, nope, I'm only that one.
Yeah. Like, and that's why when, I don't know what it's like here in Oklahoma City, but one of the places I worked as a pastor, there was quite a few Adventist churches in the city. And sometimes there was a bit of territorialism with the pastors and the people, and like, oh, if they're doing that, we're not going to go to that. We're just going to our own stuff. We're the same church in different locations, and we need to allow people to go to whichever church is going to help them to grow as a Christian in the way that they need it. And that can be really hard, particularly for pastors, or particularly for some people who want everyone to come to their church. But it is more important for someone to go to a church where they are growing. And I said to pastors at this one place that I was at, I said to them, I don't mind if my members go to your church if your church is going to make them a better Christian. I'm happy for that to take place. And I said, and I'm hoping that you're happy for them to come to mine if they're growing at mine. Anyway.
I have a couple of questions. So one is related to Ellie's question, but it seems like a lot of the generations do have an openness to new things or some flexibility, or there's a pragmatism involved. It does seem like the traditionalists are a little more rigid.
They are, yeah.
And so I think a lot of times in our churches, we end up deferring, taking the path of least resistance to not make them upset.
Yeah.
How appropriate is it for us to always worry about that group of people versus the other three generations that are a little more open to things?
We've lost a lot of people because we have catered to only one generation. And one of the best ways that you can help the traditionalist generations to change is face them with the fact that the younger people may not come to our church anymore unless we make it more appropriate to them. And one thing that they are and it's something that we all become very aware of as we get older, is having a legacy. And I know for a fact that the traditionalist generations, they are worried that our church is going to die. And so one thing that can be done to speak into that is just letting them know, well, we're not compromising on God. We're trying to meet the needs of a younger generation, and it's important for them to actually come to church. So I think that we should listen to them, but we also need to let them know that they're not the only ones in the church. You can't focus all your attention on one group of people. And sometimes sometimes it doesn't often happen where they actually verbalize it, but sometimes you can tell it's there, where usually the oldest generations have a lot of power when it comes to finances. And sometimes they will try to play the finance card. What do I say to that? Well, God owns all the cattle on 1,000 hills, right? We should not give in to hostage negotiations, because that's what it is. If you're saying, well, I'm going to give less offering unless you do it my way. That's not Christian. Yeah. Yeah. I said there's another aspect to that.
The point is that what I find throughout my years of experience in the ministry is that there's the newer generation wants to have some power in the church.
Yes.
Wants to be empowered in the church, but at the same time, they're not responding either financially or stepping up to the plate to make things happen.
Yeah.
They just want it because that's their dream, that's their ideal, that's what they would like to see.
Is this the older or the younger?
The younger generation.
Yeah.
When it's confronted with the traditionalists, say, okay, wait a second.
They're not giving.
Let's put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
If you want all this here, well, let's go ahead and put some effort to make things happen.
Yeah.
Not just talk about it and be wanting to have all the power and ruling over the things.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of the coin.
That is a fair enough thing, and it's not an easy issue. Um, yeah, and when I talked about the hostage situation, that doesn't happen all the time. It's just sometimes there's that, and that often makes things not very nice. But it is true that the younger generations also need to be willing to serve and do things as well. I do notice that often the older people are, the more they end up um, giving. I know that in a lot of the churches I looked at, the ones that in my research, the generation that seems to be um, serving the most in church is Generation X and baby boomers. And part of that is because they have kids in the church and they're helping with Sabbath school, and it's just that age, and that's part of it as well. Is as people get older, they tend to get more responsibility. But it is true. It needs to be a giving on both sides.
And I can definitely agree with what Pastor Ellie was saying. With my generation, what you see a lot is that they want the name but not the responsibility.
Yes.
And so then it becomes this.
That is a very young thing.
Yeah.
Too. That is something that I think we've all done when we were young. So, yeah.
I have a couple of questions. You said Gen Xers tend to be jaded, and I Googled jaded, and the Google definition says tired, bored, or lacking enthusiasm, typically after having had too much of something.
Yeah.
Could you explain jaded a little bit?
Maybe cynical is a better word. Yeah, maybe cynical. I sort of saw it as being burnt, and so I don't want to put too much out on the table because I've had bad experience doing this sort of thing. So is it here? No. There it is. Yeah. So I guess they tend to come across as cynical. Tend to like a lot of the late night comedians, talk show hosts, they're Generation X. Their humor is very much what a lot of Generation X think, and so I guess the jaded think is where Generation X are cautious because of maybe being in the past. Yeah. So yeah, so they're very realist, cynical because of things that have happened in the past. I've tried to help before, and someone blasted me for it. Things like that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because that's me.
Yeah.
I'm very cautious once I've
No,
had experience.
and that's very
And
much
that's why it stood out to me because I'm a Gen Xer.
Yeah, and that's very much a Gen X thing. Is because of we're one of the least represented in the church because most Gen X left the church. The ones who have stayed in the church are extremely resilient people, extremely resilient, and a lot of them going into leadership. Gen X is now starting to come into leadership positions. There's now conference presidents who are Gen X and stuff, and you're starting to see some people who they can stand like a concrete wall and have people throw things at them, and they're like, oh yeah, is that all you have? It's because most of Gen X left the church. The ones who have stayed are very resilient, but it's also they have that very much of a, all right, I know you're probably going to throw your left hook in somewhere, so I'm just going to be cautious. Yeah.
And that could kind of be a good and a bad thing, right?
It could be a good and a bad thing. Yeah.
My other question is, you said millennials are, they tend to like mentoring. And I have a son and a daughter who are millennials, so that kind of stood out to me. But
and mentors being people that they're not related to, unless maybe an aunt or uncle.
Yeah.
But not their parents.
But And excuse me for asking this question,
No,
but
no.
I see a lot of laziness in that generation.
There is.
Want it for, can I finish? Want it for nothing, kind of.
Yeah.
I want it, but I don't want to work for it.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Part
You
of
know.
that, part of that, I think, is being young.
Is that the reason they need
Well,
the
we were
mentoring?
called that.
That's what I was.
Like we,
Sorry,
like
that was-
I remember they used to call us that. So I think part of it is being young, but part of it is also millennials have very much, not all, this is generalizing,
Spoiled.
but millennials have also been spoiled, have had the silver spoon in their mouth a lot. And if you've grown up with that, what happens when you suddenly are the one who has to do everything yourself? And that's why it's hard. And it's because they've had this sort of expectation on them. And really, we've failed them in a sense because we haven't let them fail. It's really hard for kids to fail in school now. In Australia, you have to have all this paperwork for you to fail a kid in school and have them repeat because we don't want to hurt their feelings. But then they get to grade 12 and they can't read, and they felt like a failure throughout high school. And then what do it anyway? Yeah, and so part of it is their probably how young they are, but part of it is also it's how they were raised, and so it's sort of society, parents, yeah. Millennials, I think, yeah. 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 But think about it this way. They have grown up being able to order pizza on their app and get it within 10 minutes. They can order something tailor-made to themselves and have it get here in 2 days, and that's too long. Like everything is instant, and when so much of your life is instant, that ends up coming into other aspects of your life, which is why a lot of millennials struggle with having deep, meaningful relationships, because relationships are not instant. And so it comes in. So the technology and the society that we have created, we are foolish to think it doesn't have an impact on us. It's just as foolish as someone saying, "Oh yeah, I watch that stuff, but it doesn't affect me at all." That's stupid. It does affect what we see and what we use. All that impacts who we are. Yeah, yeah, and that's the jaded thing very much. We're very cautious because we've been burnt by people. Yeah, it is called like that'll come out to any group of people that gets upset if they don't get their way.
I did Google up jaded. I want to know what your definition of jaded is.
Oh no. Well, no, it's what I've said. It's what I've said. Like it's where you you have had stuff happen to you that has hurt you, and you are cautious about things. So when someone, it's a bit cynical because you've had things happen. You've had people break their promises, and so when you have people tell you stuff, part of you is like, well, we'll see if that actually happens. Like, I'll see it when I believe it. That's jaded, where you don't trust too much.
You don't.
Well, because I was gonna go back to like what he said, because the way we were raised and the way we were taught, I guess I was really like, a lot of my church values were raised by traditionalists.
Yeah.
And they, it was more like by the book, but when you read the book too, it also speaks about like God like things done decently and in order.
Yeah.
And we as people, like, my grandfather, he was a pastor, God rest his soul. He's not here anymore, but it was more about like he said to be careful with this, and it's happening in today's churches. And it was something that my wife and them know I mentioned, like, you're not supposed to, we all make the body of Christ.
Yes.
But you're not supposed to be in positions unless you're living for Christ.
Yes.
So that meant like being in certain positions, even it's all important, even music,
Yeah.
even all of that. If you're not living for God the way you're supposed to, then it goes to where you're supposed to give a gift from the heart.
Yeah.
That's where the gift from the heart comes from. Say, for instance, you're not living right, but you have a beautiful voice.
Yeah.
Oh my God, we all want to hear you sing, but you're not living right for God.
Yeah.
So now you're over, and so it trickles down. And we had spoke about that in Bible study a little bit. It could be very stepped on because we all fall short of the glory.
We do.
But God weighs a man by his heart. And we all want, like he say, they want the position, they want the title, but they don't want to do what it takes to earn the title.
Yeah.
And so it's becoming where you go to a lot of churches, like, no disrespect, I won't speak on a church, but they're putting people in positions with people, and they're not even living up according to. So you understand when you say the millennials are like they are. So what do you do about that when you see that people recognize like, oh, they ain't real about what they doing, but they're in it. And so it's making people leave the church. What do you do about that?
Yeah, it's really hard. I'm trying to think if it's particularly something that in some ways has always been there, or maybe it's just more prevalent today. Yeah, yeah. It is difficult, and yeah, I have in my time of being in different churches, and um, I haven't pastored in all the places I've lived, but I've been at churches where sometimes people have been in positions where everyone knew that they were doing stuff that they shouldn't, and yeah, that does it's hard because there's trying to figure out the grace aspect, and maybe there's some positions that are fine and other positions that are not, depending on maybe whether it's a leadership position or not. I think if it's a leadership position, it should be a lot higher up there. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. And that happens a lot, especially with music ministry. Like worship leaders. Yeah. Yeah, even in leadership. There's and I don't I don't think it's a generational thing. It's something that I see in the church when I was a teacher and when I was as a pastor. Sometimes I remember when I was a teacher, sometimes people were really good at teaching, and the assumption was, well, they'll be a great principal then. It's a different skill set. There's different expectations, and sometimes the same is with this person's a great pastor, so let's make them a administrator, or this person does a lot in the church in this area, well, let's make them the head elder, when that might not be the best thing. And so I think sometimes we assume if they have one gift or they're good at something, that means another. I don't know if that answers anything, but I agree with you. I don't. Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Okay, this is a little bit in the subject, but different. What did you recommend, Pastor? What will be the dynamics in dating and the different generations? So I'm going to give you several things that happened to me. I'm 47 and I'm in this dating website. I don't know what is it, but a lot of the 32-year-old really like me.
Yeah.
And the men my age or maybe 5 years older,
They want someone young.
no, yes, but they like me. When I meet them, they behave so old,
Right.
super old. And it's just funny because when the youngest one contact me, they want to talk a lot in writing.
Yeah.
The older ones or my age, they're like, okay, I see we have a lot of similarities. I like your pictures. But when can we meet?
Yeah.
Like right away, I see all the difference. The other ones just want only talking on the phone, the testing
Yeah.
first. And I have many people telling me, Sandra, you're going to have to find somebody young because you have a young personality. And then I have one doctor that I used to work. She married a man that was 8 years younger. My cousin.
Yeah.
I have several people telling me
Yeah.
that. But I'm really concerned. And I remember hearing something in Ellen White mentioning like no more than 5 years. But I'm just curious because I do see when I
Yeah.
talk to those when they're that 10 years younger than me, I see a lot of difference
Yeah.
in the communication and everything. But I don't relate the people my age because
Yeah.
they feel so old.
Yeah. Well, a couple things. For one, with Ellen White, it's always good to look into context. Most people didn't live as long as they do today, for one, back in her time. So 5 years was a lot. But some of the other things, it's a personal thing, very much. The if they were in their 30s, they were millennials, and millennials they want to really get. They are very much into knowing the person. I mean, everyone is into knowing the person, but millennials are very, very authentic, and it's not just about what someone looks like. Oh, that's just painting the other generation not good. I don't know completely how to respond to it aside from I know I have met couples where one is one generation, one is another, and there is 5 or 10 years difference between them. And I guess it's really something that you would really want to talk to God about, and it could be fine. There's no hard line when it comes to the characteristics of one generation and the other. There's a lot of people. I sort of fit into what some people would call the Xeno generation, where I'm in between a Generation X and millennial, because I was born in '77, and some people say it's '75 is the cutoff. Some people say it's '82 is the cutoff. And I have characteristics both. Part of it's because I've spent so much time with millennials. I think I've taught millennials in high school. Now I teach them in university. I don't know specifically what to say aside from very much making sure that you talk to God about it. And making, and it needs to be something that you feel like God is really in. And my parents were 10 years apart, but my dad was the older one. My mom was the younger one. Usually it's that way, but it doesn't mean that it can't be the other way. Yeah. So I don't have any straight answer for you. Sorry. Yeah. 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 My wife likes to my wife likes to say that she imported. Yeah.
All the way from Canada.
Yeah.
Just a couple of things, and I want to open this up, and I want to say to you that probably the oldest person in this room, that there are things that I don't know. And I will assure you that all of us in this room can say the very same thing. in boxing up traditionalists and baby boomers
Yeah.
and Gen X's and millenniums is just a different way to continue what we've been doing.
Yes. Yes.
And as I look at this, what I think we need to do and what I try to do and not good at it at all is to mentor
Mm.
and be mentored. I have
Yes.
5 mentors in my life right now.
That's fantastic.
And they are millenniums, they're traditionalists, they're baby boomers, and they're Gen X.
Yeah.
And as an elder in age and not in title in this church, that's what we need to learn.
Is mentoring.
That's what our elders need to learn, all of us. So we can mentor and set an example to accomplish what you're talking about doing.
Mm.
And I won't make that judgment. But we all have all of those traits.
Yes.
And I have a mentor. How old are you? 31 years old. And he knows that there are things he doesn't know.
Yeah.
And he props me up where I'm weak. And occasionally I have an opportunity to do that for him, seldom. So I know I'm going to blow his head up here a little bit. But fact is, the success of this church depends on how the elders lead it.
Yeah.
And we need to be leading it from behind, not in front, by example.
Or maybe even beside.
Yes, sir. Agree. Now, I don't know where there's a question in that, but to me, there's a lot of them. The question is, how do you bring all of those traits together to one? That's a big
Well, there's a couple things to respond. These are trends, and they're generalizations. And so not everyone's going to fit into this, and I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay, now, here's my question. You grew up in Canada, I think. Now you live in Australia and you travel America. Do those traits fit in all 3 of those countries, or are they different?
They tend to fit. Interestingly, there would be other things on there that I don't have up that might be slightly different. Some other questions, but these do tend to fit from what people when I talk to people about them. Often, the ones from those generations will say, "Yeah, I'm a bit like that." But that doesn't mean everyone is going to be fitting that same thing, because we're all individuals.
Okay. And one other thing, and you've mentioned several times that you have researched all this, and I believe you without a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah.
Could you tell me what your top 5 resources in research are? Your top 3, whatever you can just pop off the top of your head.
My top resources is journal articles. So I look at them, but a lot of this stuff comes from books. A lot of the generational theory stuff, where it's learning about the different generations, come from different kinds of books. There's on my computer, I have a list of some authors that talk about different aspects. Some of them are secular, some of them are Christian authors that are taking the secular ideas and bring them in. Some of it is just my experience. I've worked with every generation, so some of it does come a bit from there as well, I do have to admit. But a lot of it comes from the research with those who have written a lot of these books. Okay. Sometimes I might look at Google to see what are some different places that you can find these things. But yeah, but Google probably has some of these answers. It might have some different ones too. Yeah.
I got a question for you. Um,
Oh, actually, before I do, I didn't finish answering the
Okay.
question about how do you bring it all together.
Okay.
The biggest thing for this is not necessarily bringing it all together. The biggest thing for this is just being aware so that conversations can take place. Because for some of the stuff, it will be a headache to bring some of it all together. But if we can all understand where everyone is coming from, it can help us to realize, oh, they're not being like that just to annoy me. There's a reason why this is important to them. So a lot of this is often to just help us to understand each other. If we can take another step and try to blend it, that does take a lot of work. It is a lot harder to try to hit every one of those. It's especially with some of them, it's really difficult. But the biggest thing I want you to take away is just understanding that the different perspectives people have, and it's not because they're just being obstinate, and they're just sometimes you sort of wonder, are they just trying to make me angry? This is to help you see, well no, they're not. This is just how they view things. And if we can understand why people view things the way they do, it can help us to go, oh, okay, there's at least a reason why. And when we know there's a reason why, usually that sort of brings the anger down a bit and go, okay, there's logic behind what they're saying. Empathy, yeah. Can have compassion on each other.
To me, this whole thing here fits like if it's a body.
Mm.
Every person has its own functions, and it's
Exactly.
they integrate with each other and become a whole. Where
Yes.
they can all function in the proper way.
Yes, and when you look at these things, you want all of these in the church, don't you? And when you have a church with every generation in it, the generations can keep each other accountable so that we can actually function better. If the whole church was an I, we wouldn't be able to go anywhere. So.
I guess my question, I don't know if you would even have an answer for this, but what do you think? What do you have any idea of what the next generation after the digital generation is going to be called?
I have no idea.
Because when I was growing up, there was nothing about Gen X or millennials.
Yeah.
And
someone will
and
probably call them there's the alpha is actually in Australia. Some of the generations are a bit different in the names. In Australia, there's one theorist who actually would disagree with me and would say, no, there's one more generation in there, and they would put the millennials as a shorter boundary, and they would say that Generation Z goes up to their mid-20s right now, and they're working on the kids, and they're calling the kids that are below the age of 10, they're calling them alphas. And I'm like, oh, come on, was it beta next? Like, oh, it's so boring, so meaningless. Yeah. So I don't know.
Okay, my last question. Last night you were talking about the Gen Xers as kind of the latchkey kids, and their parents were traditionalists. What was going on?
Traditionalists and baby boomers.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was going on for those parents that made them so absent or uninvolved?
Did you want to respond to it?
Most of it was workforce. It was all about parents trying to leave their kids, leave their kids inheritance. So it was more about work.
Yeah.
And then there was a lot of single parents that had a lot to do with that too, and had to be in the workforce.
Yeah.
I truly believe I was raised in that. And a lot of my friends are mainly single parent.
Yeah.
Or if not single parent, their parents worked all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of it is financially orientated, either financially orientated because they didn't have a choice, or financially orientated because they wanted a lot of wealth so that they could give their kids stuff, right? Um, and unfortunately, a lot of the Gen X didn't want stuff; they wanted their parents.
Well, I
I hope that answered it. Yeah.
from my experience, a lot of it did boil down to consumerism
Mm,
because when I didn't have my child until I was almost 37,
yeah.
and I worked at the post office and I made really good money. But when she came, I didn't want to work anymore. But we'd never taken on a lot of extra debt, so I didn't have to work.
Yeah.
And I had to talk to a lady, and she said, "I'm so jealous because you're able to stay at home with your baby." And she had 3 children, and she and her husband both worked horrific hours
Yeah.
at the post office. But in the next breath, she told me how they had a TV and a
Yeah.
telephone in
Yeah.
every room in the
Yeah.
house.
Yeah. Um, yeah. And that was something that was a reason as well. So it's not just, it was financial because it was very materialistic. People wanted to have the latest thing. They wanted to have lots of TVs, and they couldn't afford it, and wanting to keep up with the Joneses. Even today, um, sometimes people, because my wife, she's been at home for the last 11 years raising our kids, and it's a decision that she wanted to do, and I was very happy for her to do it. That we were both raised like that, um, and we don't have a lot, especially the last 3.5 years. I've been working full time, and we have people come up to us and say, "Oh, wow, that's so amazing! It's so great that you guys are able to afford to have her stay at home." And we're like, um, "We don't own anything. You guys have lots of stuff. You could have it too if you." And yeah, so some of it is very much the material. It's having stuff. So it's either, a lot of it's either working because you had to work because the divorce rates were so high, um, or it was working because you just wanted to bring in a lot of money and you wanted to have stuff. And I've met a lot of people where their parents were together, and their parents, and they were my age, and their mom was home, but their dad was hardly home, and he was very much a workaholic. He made tons of money, and basically he was doing it for the kids. And when it was time to go on vacation, he would go with them, and they didn't know who he was, and they'd get into fights and arguments, and he would just try to give them stuff instead of time. And yeah, so so money drove a lot of the stuff with the Generation X, and for some it was also an independent thing. Like, for some parents, the reasons why they divorced, or the reasons why they wanted to work all the time, was because they just wanted to do what they wanted to do. Everyone else needed to just let them be who they wanted to be, and that was part of, yeah. Anyway.
I feel like I was probably fortunate in my time. I grew up in a rural area, and you take rural against city.
Yeah.
I was When I was growing up, we had chores to do. We had things to take care of around the farm.
Yeah.
Uh, I started working out when I was about 12 years old from the house. I helped my dad, and then I got to working out, and I've been working out ever since. But I was fortunate enough to raise 5 kids. I had 2 of my own and 3 stepkids. We lived in the country. And back then, my kids had an opportunity to start working when they was in high school or before.
Yeah.
Because they could work for farmers in the area.
Yeah.
They could learn responsibility. They could learn things they need to do. We were able to have animals. They had 4-H, FFA, stuff like this, where the kids in the city, in a bad situation, the way I see it, they had opportunity for nothing, basically.
Yeah.
It's not their fault.
Yeah.
Mom, dad work, they're just here beating concrete.
Yeah.
And then they started passing a law the kid couldn't go to work to what, 17, 18 years old or something like
Yeah.
that. Child labor crap. But it's just stuff that these kids grew up in this
Yeah.
environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like I was fortunate, lucky. My kids are doing fairly well. I've got one daughter, stepdaughter, that she wasn't going to raise her kids like she was raised. And I said, you know, you didn't come with a manual.
Yeah.
I had to do the best I could with what I had to work with. And she raised them, and it shows. She's got a problem, but that's her problem. But that's my story.
Yeah. Yeah. And definitely, and this is where culture comes into it, right? And urban and rural culture is different. And yeah, there is a lot. There is, and I spent, it was just a year, but I spent a year in a rural area. And there's good things about it, and there's not so good things about it, and yeah, it does impact who we are. Being raised in the country versus being raised in the city is going to impact how people spend their time. So yeah.
I've got, I don't know, they're kind of some questions and then other thoughts, but you know, usually when you see stuff like this, you don't see anything before the traditionalists. Is that just because really since then the world has gotten so much smaller, just because we can communicate and, you know,
So
newspapers?
you mean why there's no information of people before the traditionalists?
Not that there's not information, but not that they're boxed into these kind of neat
Yeah. I haven't looked at a lot of the historical stuff from before their time. There was stuff that we knew very much about them. Strauss and Howe, they've wrote extensively about it, especially when they're talking about this 4-generation thing that they're talking about. And they would say before the GIs, the generation before them were basically, I have to think that they were basically like Gen X. And they lived in a time like Gen X where there was lots of corruption, there was lots of crime. It's interesting that they see this repetition of history every 80 or so years. Yeah, so I don't have that stuff there basically because they're all gone. They're all gone, but there is some stuff on that. And they did have their own characteristics. The GIs didn't necessarily. I'm going based on memory, and like I said, it's not my area. But from what I remember, the GIs, they didn't think too much of the ones that were just before them. So you tend to get along best with the generation, not next to yours, but the one, mind you, it is a bit different because Gen X mostly gets along with millennials, but usually you get on the best with the ones that are a generation ahead of you.
Yeah,
because of the pendulum swinging from one extreme in society to the other.
That's interesting because I figured, you know, you didn't see much about that because they weren't so, you know, I mean, even now there's a lot of gray area, but they weren't so cut and dry just because the world, you know, you weren't familiar with everything that was going on. So I assumed it would be more culturally based, but.
And it is more culturally based. And just to speak into that, if you look at the generations that I shared yesterday, the timelines were much, much longer for both traditionalist generations than the other ones. Getting into millennials, some theorists are saying the millennial generation, it's only a 15-year time span. The silent, it's like 25 years. And part of the reason for that is because globalization and the speeding up of technology and society, things are changing so fast that there is a big difference. There is a lot more of a difference between 15 years between two people than it was in the past. So part of it is that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with it. Was, I wonder, with the ramping up of technology and everybody being aware of what's going on all over the world so quickly, that it's sort of making these characteristics a little more black and white,
Yeah.
which would give us all of these different characteristics, more of them at one time. And I'm wondering if God is sort of using the technology and
To
using that
ramp
ramping
things
up
up.
to give us all of these different characteristics and all of these gifts at the same time, to really to finally work together and
Yeah.
to finally get the gospel out and whatnot.
And that's a good point. I have a lot of working with the millennials and the digitals. I have a lot of hope in the future of the church, and a lot of people might not see it that way, because the even with the Gen X, millennials, and the digitals, the ones who are staying in church, they seem to society is at a place where if you are something, you walk in it. You don't just say it. And those who stay in the church,
They're harder to be shaken out.
they're
They're
harder
not
to be
going to leave for
shaken out.
anything.
And they tend to follow things a lot more than when I was growing up. There was a lot more surface level stuff. Yeah, and so I would agree that I believe God's hand is in it, where we are having. There's an interesting thing, though, that I haven't mentioned is we live in a time where there has never been so many generations alive at the same time before in history.
Because they've shrunk too, right?
They have. It's
People are
not just
living
that they've shrunk, but that we live longer. But the other side of the coin to that, we also, at the same time, we live at a point in history where generations have never been so segregated. And so you have 6 generations currently alive at the moment, 6 or 7, if you include the traditionalists as 2. And yet they don't mix much. Church is probably the one place in society where they will all mix together. Even families, like, they don't. You don't really. How many people have family reunions where you have like 4 or 5 generations all together? It's not a whole lot. I have friends and people I know in Australia where they have these, like, there's the Townend family in Australia. One of them is the president of the South Division, Glenn Townend. I taught his daughter, and the Townends, they get together, I think, every 2 years, and there's like tons of them. And I'm always a bit envious of families like that, because most families, my family is definitely not like that, and a lot of families aren't like that, where they don't really get together much. So we have lots of generations living at the same point in time, but not talking to each other at all. So it makes for an interesting dynamic, really. Yeah.
Your buzz on this seminar is, why can't we all just get along? I'd like to hear your answer to that question. You've pointed the problem out terrifically, and I couldn't agree with you more.
These right here, I guess, is how do we get along? The first one, do to other people the way you would want them to do to you. I think a lot of times we're so self-absorbed of getting our way, we don't really empathize with other people. We've lost the ability to empathize in society. If someone's in trouble, we sort of go, oh, well, that's too bad. I'll pray for them. Prayer is good, but often when we talk about different generations not getting along with each other, selfishness is the enemy of intergenerationality. We can't be intergenerational if we're just looking out for our own way of doing things. And so do to others the way you would have them do to you. If you were in their position, you'd probably want to have some input and some being able to have someone listen to them. So that's part of it. If we understand why people think the way they do, that's going to help us. And also, we argue about a lot of stupid things, like a lot. And if we can realize that fact that we argue about things, we argue about music, and like and it's because music is very personal and music speaks to us. And there's some music that I personally don't really like, and I don't really want it in church. But I've had people talk to me about this instrument and that instrument. But when you look at history, 500 years ago, the pipe organ was the tool of the devil. And it really, when they were first coming over from Europe into the U.S. 500 years ago, there was business people in the church who were telling their ministers, "You're making a huge mistake. I know that thing cost $5,000, which back then was a lot of money." And they said to them, "I will give you the money it costs for you to buy that if you would telegraph a message for the captain to plunge it into the sea." That's the pipe organ. That's the instrument Jesus plays now, right? We argue about these things, and they're stupid things, and and this is a touchy issue. I don't really like to get into it because everyone has their thoughts on music. I have my thoughts on music, and I don't really like to say what I like. But we argue about things that aren't in the Bible a lot. And I guess part of the solution for all this is just keeping in mind, does the thing that this person is doing, is it bringing them closer to God? Forget about me, but are they having a closer walk to God because of it? If the answer is yes, maybe I should back off. Because we all respond differently to the Holy Spirit. We all have we have different spiritual gifts, but we also have different love languages. And yeah, and so I guess one of the things is just we need to think more when we go to argue with people. And I think if we could be friends with people that we disagree with and spend time with them, dare I say it, wash their feet at foot washing. That's scary stuff. But if we do things like that, we will probably find that we can accept who they are as a person, even though we disagree with what they're thinking, because we know that they're a person. They're not just this person who doesn't like what we like. So that's part of it. Yes. We should we're all on the same mission. We're all trying to bring people to Christ, or at least we should be. And we need to understand there's different ways to skin a cat, right? The way that you do evangelism here in the U.S. isn't necessarily the way that you would do it in Australia, isn't necessarily the way that you would do it in Asia or Africa. And I have the first district I pastored, I had 3 pastors in a rural district in northern Saskatchewan. And I'm more of a suburban person, and so I struggled with that. But all 3 of those churches, in each church, there were some things that you dare not do, whereas in the other church, it was fine to do. And then you go to that church, there's some things you dare not do, but in this third church, it was fine. And so even in an area that was where each church was about 2 hours away from each other, rural, there was still differences in cultures and differences in how you do things. They were all Adventists. And when you go around the world and you go to Adventist churches all around the world, wow, there's a lot of different Adventists. Even in one church, there's a lot of different Adventists. And if we can remember that we're all trying to accomplish the same thing, but there might be different ways, yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh, well, praise God. Praise God.
I brought up something just this week in the Adventist Professional Ministers group about, this having disagreements and being passionate about them. And it's okay to hold your opinion and to be passionate and to even believe, I believe this is wrong, or I believe this isn't right, or I believe it shouldn't be done this way. It's okay to do that. But where I think we cross into murky waters is when we turn disagreeing about something into shaming.
Yeah.
It's okay to say, I don't believe that, that those pants that you're wearing are acceptable for me to be wearing, and I don't really like that you're wearing them, but if that's your choice,
Yeah.
I'm not going to take it.
Yeah.
But where we turn into shaming is when you start making statements like, I can't believe an Adventist would ever wear that.
Yeah.
I can't believe that a
Yeah.
Christian would ever beve that thing.
Yeah.
Where you start boxing people out
Yeah.
and saying like,
And
well, you can't be a
cut
Christian.
them off. You make them look like they're evil or they're stupid.
Right. But you can hold an opinion and disagree,
Yeah.
and that's okay. And I
And
believe
you can
that
say,
we shouldn't.
I don't agree with you, but I respect your opinion.
Yes.
Or I disagree with you, but I love you anyway.
Yeah. And finding that balance, because some people feel that I've got to be a bull in a china shop and tear people down, but then the other side is, well, I just need to bend over and agree with everything so that I don't upset them.
Speaking specifically into Adventist culture, we need to be aware of one weakness we have as Adventists is we love to debate. The Adventist church was built on walking into a town and beating down the other ministers in town to a pulp in a debate.
Yeah.
And we have taken that knowing the answers, we've taken that, and that's why we struggle with the heart issues, the relationship stuff. And we often fight about things in churches because we do have a history of knowing the answer. And that really causes a lot of issues, particularly in the Adventist church. That's true. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, with understanding the different generations, it helps because, I know that for Gen Xers and for millennials, like this quote that I read last week, it really, resounds. It was a book by Rachel Held Evans, and she said that people are not looking for a church that has all the answers.
No.
They're looking for a church where no question is off limits.
Yeah. And that's the difference between modernism and postmodernism.
Exactly.
And we are scared of postmodernism, but you know what? The church, I believe that the people of Jesus' time were actually very postmodern. You think about it, Pilate says, what is truth? If that's not a postmodern question, I don't know what is. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Because the Bible says, yeah, but if they don't know the Bible and they don't read the Bible, saying the Bible says is not a very good answer. That's like saying, well, because my dad said. He's not my dad. Yeah, like, yeah.
I wanted to say also, and this is from a lifelong experience. This is totally true, and I had confirmation by it through the Bible, and a lot of us need to understand that that's when we get closer to God, when you feel humiliation.
Yeah.
When you being humiliated and you humble yourself and deal with humiliation, that's when God comes. That's when God's presence is totally around you. And I'm a living example for that. So that's something that I think that we really need to understand is it's about humiliation.
Yeah.
Especially
Being
the way
humble.
they did Jesus.
Yeah.
Humility.
Yeah, humility. Yeah, yeah. And that's why Moses had such a good relationship with God, is because like he was the humblest man on earth
Right.
at the time. Yeah.
Oh, now.
Yeah.
I was going to give you the mic.
But I've been listening to the House FM, and they do a mighty ministry on that radio station. They, they're listener funded. They don't take money from advertisers.
Yeah.
And they have some of it's rap, and I've come to admire that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very
I s-
much what they're saying.
Yes.
And
I
the
mean,
intention.
yeah.
And a lot of rap has a yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh
I mean,
yeah, and a lot of it it's not really coming from a good
Oh no.
spot
well,
at all.
that's-
But that's the same with rock.
Yeah.
That's the same with a lot of stuff. It's not coming from a really good angle, but there is some gems in there.
Yeah. But that's why I didn't like it, was
Yeah.
because it talked about killing police officers.
Yeah, and
some of the
and-
other
and swearing and
denigrating
women and- yeah.
and yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that's some mighty work they're doing on that station.
I just want to share this real quick, and I'm going to be quiet. But I called it rap crap. And the first rap that I've heard let me finish. The first rap that I heard that I really enjoyed was in a Seventh-day Adventist church in Dallas, Texas.
Is it the spoken word? Yeah.
It wasn't tearing things down, but that's the first place I heard it and
Yeah.
enjoyed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
In a Seventh-day Adventist church.
Yeah. And it can be done and really it's very much where the heart is. Where is it coming from? We've lost our host, but I think we're coming to the end, I think. Oh, he's coming out, I think. I think we're at the end, Pastor TJ.
Oh, okay. Well,
I think so.
I don't see anybody jumping up and down with their hand in the air, so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for. All right, Twyla. Thank you guys for coming. For those of you that could make it last night, and for those of you that stayed today, I'm really hoping that that's what Pastor Nelly and I were just talking about. Those of us that were here, if you were blessed by this, talk it up. You all know one or two people that weren't here today that could really benefit from this. So just let them know, what you learned and how helpful it was. And then we can start, reminding people. I'll do it next week, and maybe a few weeks from now, remind them again that, hey, this is online. It's on our YouTube page. Because, the more of us that hear these sort of messages and understand each other better, the more we're going to want to work together, and the better we're going to be able to work together. Because a lot of our disagreements, as we've seen, they're just coming from different perspectives. It's not that, some of us are all about, following the letter of the law and everyone else is godless heathens. There's a disconnect somewhere else. Yeah. And that was the surprising thing, is that millennials are a lot of times, shown as they don't care about morals, but morals are very powerful. Yeah. It's just the fence posts have been widened a little bit. So for someone with smaller fence posts, it looks like, well, you're outside of my fence post, and so you obviously don't care about morals. And so this isn't going to help us all agree on everything, but it will help us to be a little more agreeable, be a little more empathetic, and understand where the other person's coming from. And just like being a family, or, really looking at all those differences, working together as a church is sort of like a marriage.
Yeah.
And there's got to be give and take. And I know that there are some areas where we as a church are okay with that. Like with our music, we'll have, a contemporary music one Sabbath, and they'll have more traditional, and that's good. But there are a lot of other areas where we could do better. Anyways, if you were blessed by this, let some people know. let some people know, if you see them through the week or you talk, or even if it's just next week at church. And then I will do my part to, to plug, the online stuff as well. But I'd love to see more of our folks hear these messages.
And
but,
even if they're from like other churches or even in other conferences, I really believe that our church in the last days, we need to learn how to get along with each other. There's a lot of stuff that's about unity in the church, but we need to be, or unity versus uniformity, but we need to be united though we are diverse. And I think this is something that for us really to have something to say in the last days, we need to learn to get along with each other. So yeah, if there's anything you want to share, even outside the church, let's try to change the way that we do things so that things will be better for the digitals.
Definitely.
Yeah. No.
Or somewhere where it's all just young people.
And it doesn't.
And there's
survive.
no wisdom. There's
Yeah.
not much leadership.
And
Those exist too.
And they, when they're really young, if everyone's really young, often 10 years' time, it's a different set of people. So they don't really survive either.
Move on. Yeah. Well, thank you for coming.
You're most
and
welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and this is really this is, whether we know it or not, this is sort of groundbreaking that we're getting some of this, because he was just at a huge convention of all different denominations. And when he presented, he had all sorts of people coming up to him saying, I need this information. Can we get this? And so for us, a lot of times as Adventists, we talk about, we look in the past and say, oh, we started out as the head and now we're the tail. Why didn't we run with it? This is another, opportunity where we can take this and be the head and run with it.
We have a lot to offer to our Christian cousins.
Yep.
A lot to offer. And sometimes we often imitate things that they're doing, but there's things that we can actually offer them to help them on their journey as well.
So thank you all for coming, and Joe, thanks for coming, and let's just have a prayer to close, and I also want to just pray for you.
Thank you very
safe travels, because plane takes off 6:30 ish.
6:45.
6:45. Yeah,
close enough.
All right, so let's pray. Lord, we just thank you for this time that we've shared together last night and today, and we believe that you are working in all generations. And so the better that we can understand each other, the better we can see your fingerprints and how you are working in all of our lives. And as we come together and share those stories, and then we work together, we know that you have something amazing in store. And we want to take this gospel to the world. We want to bring about the kingdom of God now and in the future. And so, Lord, just give us wisdom, give us tact, understanding, forgiveness, love, grace, all of those things that we need to work better together. Lord, we just thank you for giving Joe the opportunity to come here and to spend a weekend with us. And now, as he's about to go home this evening, I ask that you would give him safe travels, help him to be able to maybe catch up on some sleep on the flight as well. And I just ask that you would continue to bless him and his ministry, but also bless his family, his wife, and his 3 kids. I know that they're excited to see him. So bring him there safely, and we ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much. Most welcome.